the low-level residues that you get by standing by the freeway.
Well, who wants to eat the mold off your peanuts?
Well,
That's just it. You're gonna wash the peanut or clean the peanut or do whatever to take care of that, so.
The processing plants aren't as good as they should be.
this chemical that's on the peanut shell is so potent that just in the process of shelling them, and then they try not to, have the dust of the peanut shell there, but there will be some that sticks to the peanut, and that ends up getting into the peanut butter. And this is actually what happened in the Philippines. And kids were getting liver cancer because of these aflatoxin residues that were in the peanut butter.
Oh, well, I'm not gonna eat peanut butter from now.
Well, address that issue.
Let me finish the thought. We don't see that issue in this country because the amount of aflatoxin in the shells of peanuts in this country is much lower than over there, because at times they had holes in the roofs of their silos, and these peanuts would get rained on, and that would stimulate the mold to grow. The mold doesn't just grow in such large quantities to create a measurable health risk until you have those issues arise, where the silos are now letting moisture into those storage places. In this country, the silos are better standards, they're dry, so we don't see aflatoxin contamination in our peanut butter in this country. But I'm just saying, this kind of highlights the general principles. If you really want to worry about your food, you can, because there are low-level toxins on everything we eat. But we can choose we have some control over which toxins we expose ourselves to. And the ones that are biomagnified are only in animal products. And it's those chemicals that get stored in fat. Not all toxins are. But for these, they become significant because of that magnification process. We don't see that process happening when you eat the foods directly. They're going to be at the low levels that we don't really need to worry and stress about it. And there was a time before vitamin B12 was invented. How did people avoid chronic anemia from B12 deficiency? This was about 100 years ago, before B12 was invented.
Fresh from the garden food.
They didn't scrub their food as well. They got it by the bacteria being on the surface of the carrots and the potatoes and so on. Sure, they'd scrub it some. Nobody likes a crunchy vegetable with sand in it. But that's where they got their B12 for hundreds of years, by exposing themselves to these low-level toxins, which also have beneficial properties like B12 and all. All right. So let's finish this video.
Like a polar bear or bald eagle. Thankfully, there aren't many cannibals around anymore, though there is one group that continues to feed off human tissues. Alkylphenols have been found to concentrate in human breast milk, particularly in women who eat fish. The highest levels of these endocrine-disrupting pollutants were recorded in milk samples from mothers who said they ate fish at least twice a week, consistent with the fact that seafood consumption represents an important source of alkylphenol intake. And even these slightly elevated levels of endocrine disruptors in the milk of mothers with a seafood-rich diet may be associated with adverse effects on neurological development, fetal and postnatal growth, and memory functions in breastfed infants, because these contaminants may interfere with the endocrine or hormonal system. Or even worse, straight animal fats, such as chicken fat, lard, and tallow, which were considered cooking oils here, or fish oil. Consumption of fish oil capsules and processed fish products was associated with alkylphenol concentration in mother's milk. Again, thanks to bioaccumulation up the food chain. And then, of course, we recycle the leftover remains of farm animals into farm animal feed, and so the levels can get higher and higher in animal food products. As one commentator responded, yes, these pollutants contaminate human milk, but they contaminate cow's milk as well. We live in the same polluted world. In fact, infant formula was found to be over 5 times more contaminated. So breast is still best, absolutely. But these kinds of studies are important in order to provide good suggestions for food choices to nursing mothers.
So I hope you got the final message. He's still saying he recommends breastfeeding because you're going to be getting more of these exposures if you use cow's milk instead of human breast milk. So if you're choosing your evils, choose the one that's less of a problem. And so even pediatricians now and all the doctors are actively encouraging mothers to breastfeed.
Pollutants in their infants. We can kind of cut out the middle fish and move lower down the food chain in hopes of decreasing our exposure to industrial toxins.
So that last slide kind of illustrated if we remove the cow from our diet, we have some control over that. You may not choose to never eat it, but to use it less often, smaller servings. Go ahead.
These are fat soluble,
Yes.
and if it's fat soluble rather than water soluble, does the body release that toxin out of the fat on its own as well as?
It does. Since it's fat soluble, our fat, let's say we have 20 pounds too many fat cells, we're going to have the ability now to store the fat and the chemical in all of that tissue. And if we go through a spell where we're losing some of that fat, now instead of just having the usual background amount that we had when we consumed it, it'll now release 10 pounds worth of extra toxin that's in those fat cells. And it's at those times that we're going to be more affected with the health side effects of those chemicals. And so if you, let's say you got exposed to this over a lifetime in small amounts, it's probably not affecting you that much. But then one day maybe the doctor tells you, well, you have breast cancer. You all of a sudden stop eating so much because you've got anxiety in your mind. You don't want to eat so much. All those fat cells now can make you sicker by releasing that toxin at that time. And that's been demonstrated in animal examples that I was illustrating about the seals. So even though we want to avoid those toxins, they even get worse in that scenario, where they're more likely to cause us harmful effects at the greater concentrations when we go through a weight loss. And so we can avoid that issue by just eating the foods that don't have as much of this in them. Certain foods help to chelate these toxins. These plant-based herbs, garlic is one, can help us deal with some of these toxins and get rid of them in very safe ways.
Cilantro, another touted for that.
So by consuming more of these green plants, these herbs, I should like to do that in the future, where we can learn about some of these herbs and their healing properties. But in the meantime, if you just use the general principle to add more of these foods that you normally wouldn't see in your diet, unless because you just bypass them, just find recipes that include this, or add those to your salad. All these different herbs and they aren't just for taste; they're also for health benefits. All right. So I have another topic that I wanted to go over, which was the supplements. And so I thought we would switch gears and instead of getting too much on one thought, break it up a little bit. Because some of this is almost like going to school. Some people don't want to go to school again. It's hard enough the first time. So let me hand out this supplement.
I had my chemistry book out this morning.
Oh, good for you.
Perfect.
You're studying for class.
What's those,
Well, I remember looking at food under a microscope in microbiology. Yeah.
passing around.
Had a question. That's the same. If we have that.
No.
I don't know if you
You want one more?
Yeah.
I think there's an extra there.
Or
And she
two
probably
or-
has one.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, he's gonna, there we go.
So some of this information about these toxins we don't really study in med school in great length. They spend very little time teaching us about some of these things, but it's out there and necessary when patients come to look for treatment. I like the approach, though, of avoiding the toxins in the first place. You wouldn't find such a subject being taught at a public university. Why is that? Because they get funding from the government and they don't want to say stuff that messes up the economy. What I just said basically affects billions of dollars
Yeah.
of products in this country. And that doesn't go over too well. If it becomes a public policy and state dollars are enforcing those policies or supporting it, there's going to be a lobby against it. All right, so on this handout, it's about magnesium. It's a little less morbid a subject. I think you can get a little anxious and a little depressed when you think of all these toxins in our environment. Magnesium, fortunately, is a little easier to understand. Most people don't hear much about this. It's not like vitamin C that we have a lot mentioned. It's kind of these less known chemical. So it's necessary for health, but because its effect in the body is affecting so many chemical reactions, it's hard to just put your finger on it and it says, oh, you know, like with vitamin C, you'll say, okay, you've got scurvy or you've got some deficiency. It's a very specific disease attributed to that. With magnesium, it affects your health in general because it affects so many chemical reactions. And so here he's giving magnesium the importance it's due. He's calling it the mineral of the year. You don't call calcium or some of these other minerals that because it's not as vital or important. He's trying to make a point that it needs a little more attention than we've been maybe making of this. And so he's referring to a study by the Harvard Nurses Study. Let's pull that video up. So I hope at the end of this talk you'll be able to know where do you get magnesium. So I'm putting that question in your mind. If you want to get more magnesium, where are you going to find it besides a supplement bottle?
Despite the promising autopsy and ecologic, meaning population data that I just covered, supporting a specific association between low magnesium levels and sudden cardiac death, there's only been 2 studies prospectively examining the association. This one from the Harvard Nurses Study, published in 2011, and this one from 2010, the Atherosclerosis Risk in Community Study, covering a multi-ethnic population of thousands of men and women. High blood levels of magnesium were associated with an almost 40% reduced risk of sudden cardiac death. And women.
So, do you understand what sudden cardiac death means?
Doesn't it mean heart attack and you die?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Here and then you're gone.
the reason I draw attention to that is you think magnesium is not that important. Well, if it can lead to sudden cardiac death, I think that makes it very important.
That's what my husband died.
One day people just have their heart stop, and that's why it's called sudden. It doesn't give them warning, it doesn't give you chest pain, make you go to the ER, and they fix you up. Something like lead poisoning. So I mention that because sometimes if we don't have the right perspective, we don't really care that much about these things. You need to know what's important and what's not. And if you find a disease that's very important, these people don't have a chance to learn from their mistakes, they just end up dead. So it draws attention to the importance of getting our magnesium. And we can't really store this up. We need to have some every day.
Lowest quarter of dietary and blood magnesium had a 34% and 77% lower risk of sudden cardiac death, respectively. Another 2011 study noting magnesium is an essential mineral in whole grains, leafy green vegetables, legumes, meaning beans, peas, lentils, and soy, and nuts, as well as seeds, that acts as a cofactor in hundreds of enzymatic reactions in the human body. A considerable body of evidence indicates that a higher intake of dietary magnesium may favorably affect a cluster of metabolic and inflammatory disorders, including many of our top killers like diabetes and heart disease. So, did they put a whole bunch of people on whole grains?
Well, if you look at the last sentence there, just kind of get a grasp for those diseases, and for those who are in the back of the room, I'll try and read it for you. Yeah, make it a little bigger for you guys. All right. So at the back of the room, it's saying that the diseases that affect or are affected if you have low magnesium levels are high blood pressure, dyslipidemia. That means you have, let's say, triglycerides that are too high, or cholesterol that's too high, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease. So these are all big diseases, and magnesium plays a role in that. And just to put in perspective, some people think, well, if I eat my salads, I'm scot-free. It turns out that the average American is getting too low an amount per day, and so does the average vegetarian in this country. So we all need to increase our magnesium levels a little bit.
So it's affecting the blood vessels, not the blood so much?
He's not explaining just the exact mechanism. And one reason is because it affects so many reactions in each cell that it's kind of hard to say it affects this very specific part of that interaction. It's a little like vitamin D. You can't quite put your finger on it, but there are so many health benefits that are caused by having too low an amount. All right.
Beans, greens, and nuts? No, they gave them a pill. A randomized double-blind controlled crossover trial, and indeed magnesium pills did improve some biomarkers in the bodies of the overweight individuals studied. But come on. In fact, even the Harvard nurses study threw up their hands in defeat, since most Americans do not meet the RDA, even taking pills. Therefore, we need more pills. And put it in the water supply and start fortifying foods. I mean, there's no way, apparently, that Americans are going to start eating spinach or something. It's true, though, that most Americans eat so poorly that they don't even get the measly recommended daily intake. This is the daily value for magnesium, 400. This is how much the average American gets. How much do you think the average American vegetarian gets? Well, recently published in the Journal of the American Dietetics Association, a vegetarian dietary pattern as a nutrient-dense approach to weight management. They measured vegetarian magnesium intake, and they're not eating their greens either. Non-vegetarians ate an average of 0.1 cups of dark green leafy vegetables a day. The vegetarians ate 0.15 cups. They did better, but still, Not enough greens, beans, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. It's not enough to eat a plant-based diet. We need to eat a healthy plant-based diet.
All right.
So how much should we be eating?
So he's recommending 400 milligrams a day,
Mm-hmm.
and fortunately the vegetarian doesn't have to get that much more, so just an extra serving or two of greens should accomplish that. Some people who aren't able to eat those amounts will choose to buy an inexpensive supplement. Certain of the supplements, they charge a lot more money for because it's more absorbable. The cheaper ones are less absorbed. But let's say you took one of the cheaper ones and you're eating as much greens as you can, the supplement would easily make up the difference. So he's saying the average vegetarian there is consuming about, what is that number? 300, yeah, 322. So they're just a little shy of the daily amount. They're better off than the average American, which is 293, under 300.
So if they only ate plant-based foods that were non-processed, I would like to see that chart,
Right.
because that certainly should do you 100%.
I would think so.
Yeah.
So sometimes we just need that perspective to realize we're doing well, but we can always do a little better, an extra serving of greens instead of just eating our potatoes and carrots. We can think, well, there are additional green things. So what is it that we should add more of? Greens.
Leafy
So that would be the spinach. The dark greens is what we're talking about. Kale, collards, all those greens, they have magnesium in them.
And your grasses.
Here we go with the grass again.
Beans, whole grains. The whole grain, the starch of the whole grains, like white flour, won't have these minerals. So that's why we keep encouraging whole grains like whole wheat flour. That's where you get the minerals. It's not in the starch component, but on the bran. And the nuts and seeds. So if you can't remember much else, just realize those 5 or 6 recommendations. Add more of that more often, and you will get more of the magnesium that's so good for our health. All right, we've almost run out of time. I thought for those who have questions related to diabetes or other specific health questions, I can stay afterwards and we can talk about those. I didn't want to necessarily repeat some of the information, but some of you have come more recently into this seminar, and if you have questions that aren't being addressed here during our lecture, I'll stay afterwards to talk about some of those subjects, so you feel like you don't have to keep waiting for some of those answers. As you're making changes in your diet, and you want to share some of those, you know, we can take a minute or two to talk about that. If you find you're having some successes or failures, trying to apply this, you know, bring that up for discussion. We can do that at the end or at the start of the class, and have a question and answer session. If nobody has any specific comments now, we'll close the class. Okay.
I still cringe a little when I open the peanut butter, the
Okay.
Adams, because it's not the best choice, but it's the $4, $3 versus the $11, $12 jar. So can you put that in perspective of Adams, or is there a better brand that I could cringe a little less, or how?
So when she's talking about peanut butter, which is a better choice?
Almond butter.
Yeah, see, we're getting to the $11, $12
Yeah,
jar.
Yeah, but almond butter is so much better.
These are
Yeah, is it well worth it or not?
Every day we make 34,000 choices, and this is one of the important ones as to which peanut butter to choose. I have these very same thoughts in my head, and so the ones that taste the best aren't always the most health promoting. Some of the brands that don't separate, that's one criteria.
Yeah.
What does separation of the oil mean? If you grind up any nuts or seeds, fine enough, the oil gets released. If you did it in your food processor and you whizzed the peanuts in your food processor, you wouldn't see that oil separating because the particles are not fine enough. And so that oil separation is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does change the ability or where the oils are absorbed. It changes how they're digested. It is healthier if the oils don't separate. But given that, it's still healthier to have the peanut butter than oils from animal sources. So I would opt for peanut butter over other sources of oil.
If you go to Winco, you can grind your own peanuts and almonds in the back of the store, and they don't separate.
Okay.
But it's better than buying Skippy or Adams
Oh,
or
yeah.
all
Well,
the other
you can't
ones.
put Skippy and Adams in the same category.
Yeah.
No, you can't,
Okay.
because one is Adams is more of a natural peanut butter. It's just the processing that everything goes through. But if you don't want to worry about that, go to Winco and go to the
Get
back of the
grind your own.
store and you can grind your own.
I think
Yeah.
Orchard Supply does too.
Same, yeah, I've seen it there, but I didn't know.
Nutrition.
a peanut butter making machine in Rayleigh's.
Okay? So that's one way to grind it up. But let's say you wanted to get your own spread. You can get it as peanuts. I was promoting walnuts. If you can occasionally do that, the omega-3 oil has better properties.
Huh.
You just grind them up in like a little coffee grinder, or?
I use a food processor.
Is that the same, can I use that, a blender? I have a NutriBullet. I
You
don't have
can use a blender. It's going to be a little harder. So for me, well, you have to make them somewhat soft.
Yeah, yeah. put some-
And how do you do it? You have to add water.
Yeah.
So I don't like this flavor just by itself plain. It doesn't stick to my bread. So I found if I add the dates, it makes it sticky, makes it whiz up. And so that's my formula. I make like my own.
Will
Google
it keep
peanut
like in the fridge?
butter for a week.
Okay.
And also, for those that are looking for less expensive almond butter, at grocery outlet in Reading, I saw some, and it was, usually it's half the price of a lot of places, so instead of 11, it may be like 4 or 5 or
That's,
6,
yeah, that's,
something
better.
like that. But they had a whole section a while back, and I got one just to try for home, and my wife liked it. It was very good flavor. It wasn't organic though. That was the thing that why we didn't buy a lot of it, but you can find great bargains at grocery outlet.
Go ahead.
Is there anywhere that I could find dietary requirements for a dog? I know that's from left field, but
I guess I'm not the best source for that.
is there a,
The dogs can live on
online source, or?
You should be able to find it online, just ask.
Well, I mean, I can Google it, but I like to sit down and read with a book or something.
Right.
The best bet is to ask
Try
the
vegetarian
veterinarian.
food for dogs, maybe that might work.
I just wondered if anybody had done any studies.
Well, if you want to put it in perspective, you can feed a dog human food.
Oh, I know that, but it starts getting expensive.
Yes, they do. Exactly.
they're
And
not,
we're not
they're not
doing
meant to
that
be.
yet.
They've actually, my kids are reading a story called Little Tyke, and it talks about a lion that just ate human food and actually refused to eat anything that had blood in it.
Yeah.
So animals can live on human food.
Well, especially dogs, because they're so domesticated.
Yeah.
This is a little off the subject, but what does
And is it vegan?
exercise right after the meal,
Oh, man.
does it make a difference? 2 hours after the meal? Or what does it do?
Well, exercise any time of the day is good for you. The benefit that is, like in that seminar we talked about doing it after you eat. Let's say you put the dishes in the sink, now you go outside for a walk. You're not talking about doing a treadmill exercise workout where you're getting all hot and sweaty, because that's not ideal. When your food is in your stomach, if you exercise vigorously like that, the food doesn't digest, it just sits there. Because your body doesn't have enough blood to send to your muscles and your stomach at the same time. It chooses one or the other. And so if it's a light exercise, it's possible to do both at the same time. And the blood sugars that normally spike after a meal are going to be more blunted. And that, you don't have to be a diabetic to have these spikes of blood sugar where they go much higher than they should. And so if you find you're having problems with your blood sugars going too low 3 or 4 hours after a meal, it could be because they went too high right after the meal, that it's having this swing. What happens then is your body makes too much insulin after the meal. It makes a little too much. And so 2 or 3 hours later, now you bottom out and go below normal levels of blood sugar. And then you get shaky and it's hard for you to concentrate. So that can happen because the spike was too high, and by exercising after the meal, you're sending some of those sugar molecules into your muscles, and it evens out the blood sugar spike that happens in the hour after a meal. If you exercise 2 or 3 hours later, it's still helpful, but not affecting that spike of blood sugar that happens after your meal. So it's still good for your health, but it's not going to promote bringing down that spike because it's at the wrong time. Okay?
Back to the peanut butter, they have that powdered peanut butter, PP2, and it's the concentrate, and it has half the fat of regular peanut butter in it.
Okay.
Where's that
You
come
can
from?
find it at Walmart.
Walmart has it.
I've tried that idea in my own experiment. I poured off all the Adam's oil, and first,
I've done that too.
I have not tried that.
It's real hard to stir the
I put
atoms.
it on like Molton. You put it on ice cream.
if you try that trick, first it's really hard to now stir it because it's hard as a rock, almost like cement.
Anyway,
And then it doesn't want to stick to your bread.
Mhm.
And so you would have to find some replacement chemical to replace the oil. And with Skippy, that's what they've done. They take off the oil, pour it off,
They said to add water.
and then they add these mono and diglycerides, which is not the peanut oil. It has other properties. It's
emulsifier.
Not
Yeah.
good for you.
not as good. And so,
Yeah, but it's hydrogenated.
Yes.
And that's worse for you.
yeah. So if it says partially hydrogenated oils, what does that flag in your mind?
Do not buy it.
Yeah, for you it does. You should think of the word trans fats.
Mhm.
The trans fats are very potent causes of plaque in our arteries. And so we don't need a lot of trans fats in our diet to increase our risk for heart attacks.
Maybe just pour off a little bit of the oil and maybe
Yeah,
half
you
of
could
it.
pour off some. Don't pour it all off, or you'll find your peanut butter needs then something like water and dates. I haven't tried that with peanuts, but that would be an alternative, where you pour off the oil, add hot water, and dates now to be like a binder, and the water makes it thin and runny, so now it'll stick to your peanut, but you don't have the oil. You have replaced it with something that is less fatty. You still get the flavor, just you lose a little bit of the creaminess from the oil, but you can get it back with the water and the dates. And that's kind of what I use when I make my spread out of walnuts.
Is there a correlation between a higher fiber diet and not getting those spikes on the sugar?
The more unrefined the food is, like say you eat your granola, but you don't let it soak very long, it's still nice and hard and crunchy, it's going to take longer to digest in your stomach.
And so it's going to bind with the glucose molecule on the
It
sugar?
doesn't release the glucose as quickly because
I
it's...
thought there was, 'cause it
Right.
seems like if I eat in the morning high fiber, there's a lot less shakiness.
Right, right.
Even with coffee.
And so the more ground up our food is, the more it digests quicker. An easy experiment, if you put milk in whatever you're eating, like a dry cereal or granola or something, if it still looks hard after 10 or 20 minutes, there's a good idea it's going to do that in our stomach. It's going to take longer, and slower is better.
Yeah, so fiber 1 is a cereal, and you can add milk and come back days later, and it's still
Yeah,
pretty firm.
yeah. I tried that with my Raisin Bran.
Uh-uh.
It turns to mush.
I started reading the boxes of raisin bran.
Yeah.
Because you had mentioned it, and I'm amazed at the sugar content.
Sure. But just the processing makes all that sugar that's in the natural raisins, in that cereal, it digests very quickly because it just turns to mush, which means the enzymes can now turn that starch into blood sugar very quickly. And so certain cereals that are more processed end up spiking our blood sugars, and then we don't necessarily feel the spike. But then 2 or 3 hours later, we feel when it's low because we're getting shaky from the body's abilities to try and raise the blood sugar. It sends out epinephrine in the blood to release protein, to make protein into blood sugar.
And it seems even the fiber has the effect of slowing down the caffeine
It does?
absorption.
Yeah, everything gets to slow down a little in the process because there's more bulk before the body can get rid of all that. It slows it down.
Thank you.
Yes.
Earl read recently that men shouldn't eat peanut butter because of the aflatoxin that can cause prostate cancer. That is something new.
Prostate cancer?
From the aflatoxin in a peanut butter.
I hadn't heard that, but I'll look into that.
Yeah, the rates of prostatic cancer arising from...
Fortunately, aflatoxin is much less concern in this country because even though it's on the peanut shells, it's at much lower concentrations. That it's less likely to be in our food chain than like if you eat it, peanuts made in another country like the Philippines, where their standards and their money, the infrastructure is not kept up to the same standards. So if, I don't know, you could avoid peanut butter if that was a concern and just use walnuts instead. I try to use walnuts more often. The kids like the flavor of peanuts more. I'm going to try that dates and peanuts without the oil trick and see if they like that. Actually, I'm just trying to reduce the omega-6 oils in their diet.
Could you sort of half and half?
You could. See, all the nuts except the walnuts have a lot of, they're mostly omega-6 oils. And an excess of omega-6 oils creates a chronic inflammation in our body. Now, there's probably other things that are more toxic than that, but if we have a choice of substituting, why not add chemicals to our body that reduce inflammation, because that promotes all our cells to live at the optimal health. All right. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.